seminar during spring break, but you came through, so I knew you would. So here we are. We have a full room. I'm very excited about that. And when the opportunity presented itself to bring Danny Coyne here, I said, well, I'm going to go for it. I have to do that. So I know Danny for a few years now. I know of Danny for many years. So if you're in nematology, and if you're in practical nematology, field-based problem-solving nematology, you come across Danny, and I refer to you as Danny. I hope that's okay. I think that goes along with your personality as a very easygoing person. You know, you come across Danny in many venues, in many books, book chapters, publications, and just what everybody in the practical nematology field knows Danny. Danny Coyne is from England, from Northwest England, I learned. Obtained his master's degree in East Anglia, University of East Anglia, in agricultural research and something else, whatever the major, I forgot that. But obtained his PhD from the University of Reading. And what sets Danny apart from most of us, I think, is that he very early, after his master's degree, literally moved to Africa and made Africa his place to do research and have his professional career. And even after he moved there, he did his PhD after the first 10 years or so of actual work in Africa. And if you just, I say Africa, it's been, let's see when I get this right. I'll probably get the order wrong. That was Malawi, that was Tanzania, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Uganda, Kenya, what else? Nigeria. So traversing Africa, east and west, south of the Sahara, and left a mark wherever he went. And he's very well known. And as I said, when Danny said he's in the country, and he was willing to come up here, and this was literally the only 2 days I worked. I said, let's do it. And as we see, we're here. We have great interest. And I think I'll turn it over to Danny with that to tell us about the threat that nematodes pose to food security in sub-Saharan Africa. So you have it.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Good morning, everybody. That's quite a glowing introduction, actually. I feel quite humbled. Thomas has been chewing my ear for quite some time and saying whenever I'm in the States to come on up and give a presentation and meet with the people in the department here. So I let him know I was coming, and he said, we're moving house that week. It's spring break. There'll nobody be there, but he said, I really want you to come, so come anyway. There'll only be a couple in the audience. Well, I think there's more than a couple. So a full house. So anyway, just to get you into the spirit of things, I've got an unusual introduction. So here we go.
You turn the volume up.
Yeah.
Levão! Niye, Danny, Mo Africa. Mo Africa. Yet Mo Africa. Yeah, Mo Africa. Wame Mo Africa. Danny, Mo Africa. Wame Mo Africa. Danny, Mo Africa. Kinangana hinya. Left the brothers. Yeah? Mo Africa.
So, Africa, land of exotic animals, of expansive plains, of majestic mountains, a land of hope, and a land of agricultural prosperity, potential prosperity, depending on the crop and where it's produced, but potential agricultural productivity. That's what I'd like to focus on with this. So I put this presentation together for a SASA lecture, actually, which I was invited to in North Carolina, so I hope you don't mind if I repeat this here. It was quite an honour to be invited, actually, to present on behalf of nematology, global impact of nematology, on the back of the work that Joe Sassa did, who died a few years ago. So I was asked to come up with a theme that would link in and fit in with Joe Sassa's work, basically. So what I'd like to do is present some of the work that we do in Africa, but to those of you that aren't familiar with nematology, I'd like to raise awareness and bring it more into scope for those that are not familiar with nematode problems and nematode damage. For those that are familiar with nematodes and nematode damage, is to raise awareness on the kind of damage that we experience in Africa. And for all of you is to bring you into focus of the situations that we work under, the crops that we work with, and the conditions that we need to face on a daily basis, and how nematodes impact on the lives of people and the crops that they produce. So, my name is Danny Coyne and I work for IITA, the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. It's one of the international centres, and the headquarters are in Nigeria, but we have infrastructure and stations dotted around Africa. We've got about a dozen where we've got physical presence in terms of staff, in terms of buildings, in terms of materials and activities. And I'm based at the moment, I was in Nigeria for some time, but I'm currently based in Kenya, which is in East Africa, and that's where I live and where I'm based from, although IITA covers sub-Saharan Africa, and I work regularly in different places within Africa. So back to the international centres, it's what's called the CGIAR, that some of you may have heard of. It's the Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research. You're all familiar with Norman Borlaug, who was very pivotal to the construction of these centres that were developed over the past 50 or 60 years or so, with the aim of providing research support to developing countries, each with either a geographical mandate or a commodity mandate. IITA has got an African mandate for 6 key staple crops. There's also a fish centre, for example, a livestock centre, a forestry centre, etc. Okay, so just to put that in perspective. So we're here to talk about worms, nematodes. Before we do, I'd like to give you a little brief background of Africa and the situation, as I said. So this is a picture of my good friend Cunley's hometown, which he's very familiar with, and I'm very familiar with being stuck in that kind of traffic. Cities in Africa, they are growing at among the fastest rates in the world. There's major urban migration. The population is ballooning, escalating rapidly. More people, more mouths to feed, more food required for those mouths. In Africa, we need to move into areas where it might not quite be as suitable to intensify that cropping situation. So we're looking at areas of land that need to be intensified but have difficulties in how we intensify that and increase crop productivity. So just to put things in perspective, this is data back to 2005, but the trend is pretty much the same if you look at the FAO data. This is for cereal productivity actually, so it's production of cereals per unit area. Productivity is rising across the world as we improve our situation and our cropping situations. Even across the developing world, productivity is rising, not in Africa. It's static, it's a plateau. So our population is rising rapidly, our productivity is static. So what happens is, and I showed the other graph as well, is that food availability and food production per capita, or per mouth, is actually reducing steadily, while the rest of the world is increasing. So we need to do something about that. Throw in the odd spot of climate change, droughts and flooding and changes in climate, the odd bit of pestilence, and we have what has been referred to not as an Africa hunger crisis, but actually a global hunger crisis. Focus may be Africa, but it has permutations across the world. So again, just put that in focus. This is a food insecurity index, all the countries across the world. Green is good. Brown is less good. Grey is where we don't have data for it, but if you see that Africa, if you're not quite familiar where Africa is here. The brown spot in the middle is all brown, basically. Situation's not that good, and you'll all be familiar with signs like this. This was a couple of years back. Headlines in the news: 11 million people in Ethiopia, one particular country, are in food crisis that particular year. And we're not unfamiliar with other signs against hunger, lack of food, starving people. So we're all familiar with that in the news, basically. So what do? Danny, okay? And we also have a preponderance of other species. What we don't have is one single nematode species, like we have here, for example. On soybean, we've got soybean cyst nematode, soybean cyst nematode, soybean cyst nematode. In Africa, irrespective of the crop, more often than not, we've got multiple species in communities. Remove one species, the other one takes over, or another one comes in. So it has an implication for management options, particularly for resistance. If we're looking at resistance against Petalanchus coffeae, the main species, actually, we might have success in that, but it won't be successful against Malloidy guyanea, because we already know that we've got different resistance that confers for different species. And then in West Africa, we've got Rhodophilus similis. The banana burrowing nematode is the main problem, with other species as well. Different ones depending on the circumstances, and you might have different populations in one area of East Africa than another, but you've basically got, in general, different communities. And this is what they cause. Irrespective of the species, they undermine the root system, they destroy the root system, cause necrosis, the anchorage of the plant is removed, and when you get a nice large bunch of banana, which can weigh substantially, hanging onto a tall stem, it crashes down and it is lost to the farmer. And that will take about, on average, about 12 to 18 months. So a farmer is waiting for his bunch of bananas, or her bunch of bananas, and if it crashes early, usually an immature bunch is worth nothing, apart from to feed livestock. So it's a major problem. So my next slide says hidden enemy. Now that's not hidden. A farmer, and we can all see the kind of damage it does. The farmers, however, do not understand, and they do not appreciate that that is actually a nematode problem. They may think it's one thing or another, but rarely do they appreciate or associate nematodes as being damaging. So we've got this hidden enemy, which I fitted in for Joe Sasser, which he had publications on hidden enemies. Now they're hidden on celery and crops where the roots are not used, but when we have root crops, root or tuber crops, they become very evident. Again, farmers may not understand what causes them, but they at least are able to see that there's damage being caused, and they know that there's a problem with that particular part of the field. So on root crops such as carrot, you can get substantial damage. Potatoes is another major problem. Malloidy guyanea is a major problem on potatoes also. You've got clean potato here, and it might not look too bad, but you've got all this bubbling. Still edible, still okay. One of the big problems is that will be used as a seed potato, and it perpetuates the disease cycle on the one hand. More severe cases, not the best photo, it's a colleague's photo, but you get substantial galling and bubbling where they are completely unmarketable. And one of the problems is you need to peel more. So less of the potato, less of the weight of the potato is available because it's corky and it's tough and it's not pleasant on the outside. The other issue is there's a rapidly rising trade in fast food, whether it be McDonald's chips. I say chips, you guys say fries. These are, and you say chips for these. These are chips, is that right? Chips? These are crisps, right? Okay. I will teach you real English. Okay. So the problem is, your crisp and fry makers will not accept root knot nematode bananas, potatoes, sorry. Where have we gone? There we go. They will not. And in South Africa alone, I know the greatest proportion of rejects on the market are due to root knot nematodes. So it has significant impact on trade and economy, as well as to the smallholder farmer. This is yam, Dioscorea yam, where, as you can see, major bubbling. This is what it should look like, but that's what it does look like, and we're seeing this increasingly. Now, I know that Cunley knows what yam is, but does everybody else know what yam is? It is not sweet potato. I had a project with Valerie Williamson, who's a wonderful person down in UC Davis, looking at Scutellanemma bradis, which is the yam nematode. It was 6 months into the project before I realised that she was working on sweet potato. And that's a true story. This is yam, and this is one particular farmer in upcountry in Nigeria, near Abuja, and practically the whole of his field, it's not the best photo, but you can probably appreciate the fact that each and every one of those, and you've got substantial weight of these tubers. They're all wasted. You can gain something out of them, but they cannot be sold at market. Nobody will buy them. So it's all for home consumption, and half of it is destroyed in any way. Right, okay, not something you have up here. We know this crop. Audience participation is coming in, I can feel it. Potato. Is there anything wrong with this crop? I know it's a loaded question and we're talking about hidden enemy, but does this look good? This looks good, okay? This is a nice, lush, healthy looking potato crop. Now I'm going to keep you in suspense because I'm going to go on to something else. I'll come back to that, okay? We all know that these are tomatoes. Does this look good? Yeah. Of course it does. Nice, healthy tomato production. This is actually an export-oriented production system in Ethiopia, and we visited this completely coincidentally after doing a nematology basic training course. And the production manager said, you can sample any plant you want destructively, take as many plants out as you want, doesn't matter, next week we're destroying this. The reason being is that root knot nematode completely destroyed the root system. When you pull it out, it's all knotted, mangled, and although it looks good, you've got an hidden enemy, and when you've got your economics, the production manager says, it's costing us money to have it in the ground, and it was taken out. So even a larger scale. Okay, anything wrong here? We went to this field. In fact, this is actually not Africa, this is actually in Chile. I think Tom was with me at the same time. You see the Andes in the background, and we were taken to this field because it had potato cyst nematode. So even when a crop looks nice and healthy and lush, it's got a problem underneath. You've got these potato cyst nematodes, in this case, sucking the life out of the potato. Right. We could go on about soccer and football here. I'm not going to, just to demonstrate that we don't work on a level playing field, and the goals are continuously be moving. And going back to the potatoes, in fact, potato cyst nematode is indigenous to South America, not to Africa, and it's never really been found in Africa until that is about 2 or 3 years ago, where we found it in Kenya, and when we did a survey we found it all over the country. Completely new, alien, invasive pest into Kenya, and it even hit the headlines, which is not good, but actually from a nematological perspective it's actually very good, because at least it raises awareness for the nematology front. So although not good, it was good in a way, and we now have a vehicle to take nematology forward, and people are becoming increasingly aware of nematode problems. Banana in West Africa, back in the 1980s, substantial number of surveys were done and found Rhodophilus similis and Helicotylenchus multicinctus as the key problems on plantain banana in Nigeria. Parasitic coffea was not found, it was not detected. Not to say that it wasn't there, but it was not detected on any of the surveys. Late 1990s, Parasitic coffea is the dominant nematode on plantain banana in southwest Nigeria. That's a period of about 15 years. How on earth does that change in such a short space of time? Similarly in Tanzania, East Africa, no Parasitic coffea in 1992 when a substantial survey was done. And in 1999, in a survey I was personally involved in, 68% of bananas sampled had Parasitic coffea. You've got a period of, what, 7 years? Unbelievable. So things are continuously changing. Not only have we got multiple species and complexes, but we've got different species coming in and going out. Okay, yam. Another crop that we've worked substantially on. Scutellanema bradis is known as the yam nematode. It burrows in. It's a Scutellanema, if you're familiar with nematodes. Not normally endoparasitic. This is one of the few examples of an endoparasite. Scutellanema as an endoparasite. Burrows into yam, and it's a major problem on yam, particularly in storage. This is on Solanum potato. Potato traditionally is grown in the north of Nigeria or the north of West Africa in the Sahelian zone. Yam doesn't go that far. But as cropping systems are changing, yam is now being grown to a greater extent in the north and potato to a greater extent in the south. They're crossing over. We've now discovered the yam nematode can make a bit of a mess of potatoes. It's an increasing, emerging problem on potatoes in West Africa. Root knot nematodes, our favourite, Meloidogyne. Meloidogyne isalcoensis. It's not a nematode I was particularly familiar with. This particular nematode is recorded and described from coffee in Costa Rica in a really small area in Costa Rica, and it's not been found anywhere else outside of that area. In Central America, in South America, on coffee, anywhere. 2 years ago, we find it all over Africa. Not in high densities, not very prevalent, but we find it in Tanzania, Kenya and Benin on tomato and cabbage. How does that work? Enterolobii. It's a majorly aggressive nematode species that's increasingly being found in various places. We're finding it on new crops in new countries all the time. New species, surveys that we've been involved with over the last 3 or 4 years, we've thrown up at least 4, if not a dozen, but definitely 4 undescribed species that are currently in the process of being described, one way or another. And on coffee, Meloidogyne hapla, never been found on coffee before, but a few years ago we find it on coffee. Case of, if you look, you find. If you start looking, you find things as well. But things are moving and migrating. Staying with coffee, I showed you this picture earlier. This, when we look at the females, is Meloidogyne africana. When my colleagues, the taxonomists, looked at the males, they got morphologically Meloidogyne decalineata. Yet, molecularly, when they assessed it on a molecular basis, exactly the same species. What happened there was in the 1960s, when they were originally described, they obviously got mixed up. We got 2 species of the same species. So that's now being re-described as Meloidogyne africana. So things are not quite what we find them as they should be, is the point of all that. So in Africa, we're finding increasing levels of root knot nematode, increasing incidence, and increasing levels of damage. Different distributions, new crop hosts, and we're even re-describing some of them. Is this because, how do we go about it? We need to intensify the cropping production systems. We need to massively upscale, outscale, and intensify cropping production per unit area to increase production. So you might have an image or an impression of large-scale fields like I flew over as I came in. There weren't many crops in the fields, but you've got large fields, large mechanization. However, the reality is, we work with people like this. 75% of the African population live and grow their crops in this manner, tilling by hand on small areas of land with limited inputs and limited outputs. So it's largely based on subsistence or smallholder, small-scale farming systems, where the inputs are of dubious quality often, and often of poor quality or a lack of inputs altogether, good inputs. So, back to that picture I showed earlier, we need to intensify. The other problem is, or issue is, or obstacle, is that the situation, farming systems are extremely heterogeneous, very diverse, vast range of different crops in small areas of land, intercropping, multiple cropping, relay cropping, with a whole range of different styles of crops and cropping systems. For example, anybody want to guess what this is? Forest, perhaps? This is somebody's banana plantation in Congo, DRC. This is somebody else's banana plantation in Uganda. Highly mixed coffee, banana, there's beans in there, there's sweet potato in there. You've got multiple crops within the cropping system. It's also damned hard work. A lot of labour input, labour requirement, and it's hard work, hard drudgery for outputs that are minimal at the end of the day. And sometimes you really do wonder to what gain. These two young ladies are a guess at what this is? Deafened by the sound of silence. This is a rice field, and these two lassies are weeding the rice field, and you really wonder whether there's going to be anything gained out of that, even with all the hard work and effort that's been put into it at that stage. So there's this common understanding or common impression that subsistence, smallholder farming, it's a simple system, but the reality is it's far from simple. Growing perhaps maize or soybean on the Iowa plains may be simple, but subsistence farming systems in Africa are far from simple. They're very complex, they're very complicated, and very diverse. So, how do we intensify those kind of cropping situations? Because the reality is it is complex, and one size does not fit all. And it certainly does not. And just in case you're missing the videos, I've got another one for you, just to give you an impression of the kind of situations. And oh, hold on, volume.
Mpunga, mboga mboga, mboga mboga mitungue. Mpunga au na nini? Na mboga mboga. Na mboga kama nisiweka. Mpunga naweka mbali. Labda mimi mitungue ndio nauza.
Kazi yangu ni kilimo. Ndio nimeoa 13. Mhogo, mpunga na ndizi na nyanya. Wanakwenda shambani baada ya siku. Kama siku ya Jumapili mapumziko.
Nilikuwa naomba sana tusaidie kuhusu haya matatizo ya mimea huko. Ndio katika mazao yote, yani tomato na pilipili. Alafu tukisaidiwa hii mipira zaidi ya drip, nasi tutazidi kwenda vizuri.
Tatizo jingine ilikuwa kama tatizo langu la pili wakati wa kilimo ile, yani inakuwa tunaumia sana kwa kiangazi, na kwa mara nyingi maji yanakuwa mahafifu. Sasa hivi ndo nimeanza kutumia. Nasaidia kidogo.
Another additional problem for the farmers is the lack of knowledge or understanding of the pests and diseases.
Kama kuna matatizo yangu inakuwa rasa wadudu waharibifu wa mimea katika tomato.
Situmii. Sina utaalamu. Ndio nitaweza kutumia.
Here I've got two kinds of fruits. This one is the healthy root. This root is infected. Because when the root is healthy, it has this root hairs which can absorb water and minerals. The root which is infected is swollen and is unable to absorb water and minerals. So the plant dies. And this problem is a soil problem. The solution for this one is sterilizing the soil before sowing.
We can improve slightly the productivity and the quality of vegetables here in Zanzibar. That will make a massive difference to the local community, both in terms of better income for farmers, but also by making vegetables more available, most likely at a lower cost to the consumers. So just to give you a flavour of the conditions and farmers that we work with, really. So we have a complex situation, and how do we go about moving forward? And it might sound all doom and gloom that I'm talking about, but there are good examples and there is good progress being made. Small areas, small contained screenhouse, for examples, to produce tomato. There is mechanisation, and there are good examples of high value crop production units for export even. big flower industry in East Africa, for example. So there are good examples on which to base. But another problem is this is World Bank figures for the researchers per million people in various countries. China's about 1,000 researchers per million people, and in Africa we've got 42 in Mali, 16 in Mozambique, compared with 1,000 in China, and Cape Verde doesn't even register. I know there's a researcher in Cape Verde, so there is at least one. So our resource base, or our capacity base, is also very limited, and you can't change or improve that overnight. It takes time and a generational change to actually build up your capacity, your resource capacity. So yeah, I keep banging home, we need to intensify, of course. And how do we do that? If we intensify, we're going to have increased incidence of pests and diseases. I know you're a silent, non-input audience, but any guesses what this is?
Locusts.
Yeah, swarm. This is a photo of a colleague of mine in Mali of a swarm of locusts, and I just think it's a superb photo, just demonstrating the kind of threat that pests and diseases can pose.
What's the person doing?
It's a young child just swinging a stick, with very little effect. So if we intensify, or in order to intensify our cropping production systems, one of the challenges will be an increased importance and incidence of pests and diseases. And at times we've got rudimentary crop protection mechanisms to work with. So if we are going to intensify, we also need better, more innovative pest management and crop protection approaches. And if we're going to keep farmers smiling, healthy and well fed, we need better pathways and better ways of transferring that knowledge and those options and those mechanisms to them. So we will talk about nematodes. We'll get there in the end. So increased importance of pests and diseases. We're going to talk about nematodes, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus on root knot nematodes. And this is not just because it was for Joe Sasser. This is because if you take everything else away, all the other nematodes, and we have a great variety and diversity of them, root knot nematodes alone, to me, are a major challenge in their own right. And I've often said, and have said, root knot nematodes in Africa, and probably the tropics, are the single greatest threat to crop production and crop improvement as a group, for various reasons. So they cause all sorts of damage to the root system. This is celery from Kunli's homeland of Nigeria. This is cowpea, or what do you call it, cowpea, black-eyed beans, black-eyed pea. This is your favourite crop, or one of them. This is soybean from Malawi. Cassava, or manioc. This is a young banana plant. It's just completely destroyed by root knot nematode, only root knot nematode. And not even tree crops can avoid root knot nematode. This is guava. Everybody know what guava is? Yeah. Guava. This is guava, tree roots, strong, thick, stubby tree roots completely destroyed by Meloidigyne enterolovii, one of the root knot nematode, a very aggressive root knot nematode. Coffee roots, different style of galling. It's not always the same, depends on the species of nematode and the species of crop and variety of crop even. This is coffee. Not only do they cause bubbling and swelling of the roots, but you can see necrosis here where the root dies. And your second favourite crop, or first favourite crop, this is maize. This is a pretty ropey looking crop in South Africa. You might think this is poor germination, you might think it's a lack of nitrogen, or it may be a lack of nitrogen through the fact that the root systems are all destroyed by root knot nematode. A colleague that took this photograph said that was primarily a crop response to root knot nematode. And root knot nematodes don't always cause the same galling and deformation of the root system that we associate them with. This is a maize root, and this is 3 root knot nematode females protruding out of the root. So if you pull that out of the soil, or you're not that careful, or you lose all your nematodes, and quite often that is the case with maize, you don't see the nematodes, the root knot nematodes, and it's not associated as being a problem with maize, but it is a major problem, certainly in Africa. I'm not sure about here. Other nematodes, just to give you a flavour of other nematodes, although like I said, we have a key focus on root knot nematodes. I personally do quite a lot of work with banana. Banana, one reason being that it has a designated problem with nematodes, nematode damage. Now, this is a picture from Burundi, a valley in Burundi, and all this leaf, I'm not sure how you describe it, all this leaf area here, that's all bananas. It's small scale subsistence for changing climates. Is this because of we're changing the cropping systems, human movement, moving pests and diseases from one place to another, or is it simply that we don't have sufficient knowledge of what really is there? I would say it's a combination of everything really. It's a whole combination. It's easy to try and pin things on climate change, and I see this certainly in my world. Climate change is responsible for all sorts of things, but actually I think we need to be realistic in many ways and think actually it's more than just climate change. It might bring money in, and if it does, then fine. So, is the fire out of control? Have we done too little, too late? No. You know, we're making progress. Every little bit really does help. We may have a major challenge in front of us, but we need to keep plugging on and moving forward. So, what options do we have in order to manage these pests and diseases that we're talking about, these root knot nematodes? I've got Green Revolution up there. You're all probably familiar with the Asian Green Revolution that increased yield. Norman ball algae, of course, increased rapidly, substantially, crop production in Asia. What is often not recognised is that it took in a huge amount of pesticide application, and then Rachel Carson, of course, brought to fore our misuse and overuse of pesticides. What they did have in the Green Revolution was a whole spectrum and plethora of pesticides and chemistry. These are all nematicides that are now all banned and are not available, been withdrawn from the market. So we don't have the same tools for an African Green Revolution, which is being pushed for, that they had in the days gone by. So we need alternatives. Essentially biologically based alternatives, or more environmentally sensitive or friendly alternatives, and one key one being resistance. If you've got resistance, use it, but don't abuse it. I think there's a good example of that with soybean cyst nematode, isn't there? Abusing the resistance and losing it. So anyway, if we've got good resistance, use it, but don't abuse it. And we're looking at resistance in a number of different ways, and just to highlight a couple. This is a banana breeding project that we're involved in, involving a whole range of people. But one of the objectives of the breeding focus is a couple of diseases, a weevil pest and nematodes as pests of banana. I'm trying to identify sources of resistance, trying to improve the efficiency of using that resistance and integrating into new banana hybrids and varieties. This is Monty Jones. He was a banana breeder with the African Rice Centre, and he successfully was able to cross the African rice with the Asian rice being high yielding, the African rice having a good source of resistance traits for a number of constraints, including nematodes. And I worked with Monty in screening for resistance and identifying resistance to a number of nematodes. So there are ways where we can work this in. There are just a couple of examples, but in general I would say we've got a lack of resources, a lack of sources of resistance, and a lack of new or novel sources of resistance. One of the aspects there is we're also dealing with multiple nematode communities. So if you have resistance to Meloidogyne incognita, for example, but you've also got Meloidogyne enterolobii, we know by and large the resistance for incognita does not work for enterolobii. So if you've got good resistance for one, you don't have for the other, and you don't really make much of a gain. So we need multiple resistance, need durable resistance, and we need better ways of integrating that. And one way, of course, is through genetic transformation. There's quite a lot of opposition still, and there's very few biosafety regulations that are in place, I think, in Africa, South Africa definitely. But we're working on that. We are working on transgenics, and banana in particular. For nematode resistance, we've got good contained field trials showing high level of phenotypic expression against nematodes. So we're moving forward. However, if we're going to start, if we're going to start with good, healthy, sound, solid material. And quite a lot of our work in terms of nematode management is starting with good healthy material, non-infected, nematode free. And just as a couple of examples, we have banana here. This is typical banana planting material being transported either from market to farm or to market, or between farmers that are exchanging planting material. Each and every one of those banana plants or planting material or seed material, I can guarantee is loaded with nematodes of one species or another. And what happens is you can pare back or peel the bananas, remove the roots, the infected roots. In heavily infected situations, you get the corm still heavily infected. All these black necrotic spots is nematode damage, most likely Pratylenchus or Rhodophilus, compared with a clean, healthy banana. So you can peel them back and provide disinfested, if you will, banana material. But what we found was, even when you peel them, you've still got some residual infection. So we work with farmers to use a simple boiling water technique, dipping the banana suckers into boiling water for a few seconds, sanitizing them, and we found extremely good results. Trying to get your farmers to dip their planting material into boiling water, however, was a different story. Actually, the biggest challenge was getting them to peel the roots back, and they didn't want to do that, so we had to demonstrate how actually if you did take the roots off, they would work. The next challenge was then, now you've peeled them, dip them in boiling water. And the other, one of the things to outline here is, that's a simple technique. Okay, you can do that very rapidly. But when you're working with farmers, farmers need to invest their time, their money, their effort, their land. They will not accept something that you tell them that we know actually should work, but although it might not always work. But whatever we say, farmers have to see to believe in order to take the jump at putting it into action. And when you've got bananas that take 18 months to grow, that can be a long, drawn-out process of making progress and being able to implement options and management options that are useful. So back to yam. This is a seed yam market in Ghana, and again, the vast majority of all that planting material that's being sold for planting material is all infected with root knot nematode or Scutellanemia bradis, by and large. Okay, what we want is nice, clean, smooth, healthy, nice size tubers that can be planted whole into the ground to produce ware yam that can eat. So we worked on a number of different mechanisms: boiling water, adding botanicals, treating with various things. And what we actually found was a simple fungicide, insecticide dip for a few seconds, dry them out, and that worked best. And that's been implemented in West Africa. And just a single example of it: one farmer, one happy smiling farmer, treated versus untreated. So we were getting on average double the yield of yam, seed yam, when it was treated. But the big difference here is that the treated set produced healthy seed yam. These are unhealthy. So although there's double the difference, or 100% difference in yield, actually these don't grow very well. So if you plant healthy yam, the difference in yield on the second cycle is exaggerated. We found, I forget, 700% we found just on one cycle. But we can always pull out one single farmer where it worked well, of course, and demonstrate that. So this is about 100 farmers that we worked with on just that technique, and the average for the treated versus the untreated, on average, was a doubling of yield across sites within Nigeria, across farms, across varieties, and so that was a resounding success. Seedling material, vegetable seedling material. This is typical farmer's seedling nursery in Africa, across Africa. Some attempt may be made at covering it, but by and large, this is what they look like. This is a nursery in Madagascar, and these are seedlings that will be transplanted and transferred to the field, and these are just a close-up of the roots from that particular nursery. And as you can see, even at about 3 weeks, you've got root knot nematodes starting to appear, galls appearing. They will be transplanted to the field. They will grow well, perhaps for a couple of months, and then the root system becomes overloaded and taxed, and they don't grow very well thereafter. This is where we want to get to, and we're working to with a large number of farmers and input suppliers in order to provide good, simple, healthy planting material that's uninfected into the field. So even going into an infected field, it does make a major difference, we've found. With seedling material, we're also looking at microbial enhancement, identifying fungi and bacteria that are antagonistic to nematodes, infect or inoculate the planting material prior to going to the farmer, whether it be seedlings, whether it be seed sets, yam seed sets, or whether it be tissue culture material. I've worked on a number of different aspects, and here's banana tissue culture, and even without pest challenge, this is coming from the screenhouse, without any nematode challenge, and we find that you even get good increased vigour through the endophyte inoculation. And those same bananas taken to the field, this was dessert banana, 3 different endophytes, Fusarium endophytes, inoculated onto TC banana, tissue culture banana, compared with the control. On the first cycle, we found that we got good response in terms of yield. Biological control agents, I won't go on. I included this because AgBiome was in Raleigh, which we've started working with. They're looking at microbial antagonists that we can then come back to Africa to be used for nematode control. So I just highlight that. Quite a bit of work with biological control. Chemical control agents. I'm not here to say don't use chemicals. Chemicals are bad. They're bad for the environment. You know, a lot of work and a lot of effort goes into producing chemicals, and when they're used properly, used in the right way, for the right reasons, they can be very effective. There's been a lag behind the removal of all the nasty toxics and new ones coming in, but new chemistry is coming in that is more environmentally and mammalian sensitive, and that I've got hope and prospects for. So delivery systems. Now we're all familiar with this. Nothing to do with nematodes. New York taxi cab. Now this is a delivery system. This provides a mechanism for delivering a payload from A to B, from one place to the next. Okay? You're all aware of that. Back to Lagos, that taxi doesn't work very well in circumstances like this. Okay? It's not very efficient. So we need better, more efficient ways of delivering our payload. It took me a long time to discover that there's farming banana production, but it's all intermeshed and intertwined. So it's large-scale banana production by small-scale producers, and it's just one long valley of banana production, basically. So you might, when you think of bananas, you might be thinking of the nice dessert fruit that you find in the supermarket, but the bananas that we work with, primarily, by and large, they're green bananas, they're cooking bananas, and there's millions of people that rely on these bananas as a source of starch staple. So people particularly in Central Africa, use bananas as a food source in the same way that we eat potatoes or maize. So in Africa, there's 2 main areas of banana production. There's Western Central Africa, which is largely plantain, the lowland areas. And there's East and Central, which is largely the highland bananas, the cooking bananas. They grow high up, at high altitude. So one of the reasons I do this, I'm showing you that within Africa, although we're working on bananas, we're working on nematodes. In West, another dog here actually. So there are different mechanisms of delivering your payload, whether it be increasing the payload in unconventional ways or in more colourful ways. Okay, this is my favourite. So looking at targeted delivery, there are different mechanisms of being able to get your payload to the site that you want it to. So as I've said with enhanced seedlings, we're looking at delivering a payload directly to the seed system. We found good results in, as I say, with bananas here. Very good results with vegetable systems, inoculating your seedlings before they go to the farmer. But one thing I'd just like to highlight is, and this is the work that we've been undertaking with North Carolina State University with Charlie Opperman, if you're familiar with Charlie. They came up with this idea of a piece of paper. Now the novel aspect of this paper is it's made from banana, and they said, Danny, we want you to test this out in Africa to see if it controls nematodes. And the idea being is that you impregnate the banana fibre, paper, with a microdose of, in this case, ivermectin. What we also did, we also looked at trichoderma as a biological control, and we looked at paper as a carrier to deliver the payload to the root system wrapped around. And we've looked at banana, we looked at yam, and we looked at potato, Ceylon potato in Kenya. So the idea is that you wrap your potato in the banana paper fibre that's been impregnated with turbigo, ivermectin. And in this case, we're looking at root knot nematodes, but in this case, we're looking at potato cyst nematode. And this is the trial site. And as you can see, this is the untreated. And just quickly going through this as an example. The untreated versus the treated. So a big difference just in aerial growth alone. And if you pull that out, okay, a bit pixelated, but you can see the difference basically. But what we found was, amazingly, the control had about 260 kilograms, or whatever the units are there, compared with the ivermectin paper. We nearly quadrupled the yields, over 3 times the yield by wrapping it. But what we found fascinating, paper alone, with no treatment, more than doubled the yield. We don't know why that is, and we're working on it. The guys in North Carolina think that the heavy lignin content of the paper binds to something, and it's very hygroscopic and perhaps prevents the nematodes from going through. We don't know, but anyway, we're looking at that. But with the ivermectin, it enables us to deliver a microdose of the chemical to the root zone, and as you can see, it's very effective. Just another couple of examples of work that we've got going on. This is with Queen's University in UK. They're looking at transgenic neuropeptides, which are very essential to nematode behaviour. They're crucial to nematode behaviour, and by finding the gene that transfers for the neuropeptide and putting that into algae and bacillus and delivering it to the rhizosphere, it disrupts nematode behaviour. It prevents the nematode from finding the root host. The root disrupts it, it travels around in circles until it dies of starvation. And basic proof of concept in the lab shows that there is potential in that, and it does work, and we need to see how it will work in the field. And then another option is, again with Charlie Opperman actually in North Carolina, looking at virus nanoparticles which are used to I'm not sure how much, but certainly medicine. So can we exploit this and utilise this for crop protection? Charlie's going to come back to us on that. But there's mechanisms that are quite advanced out there. Cultural control, I won't go into rotation, mulching, everything else. We're all familiar with that. We do work on that in various different manners. But the main point is there are various ways of dealing with things in these complicated, complex systems of smallholder farmers. And it may be very simple method of actually peeling your bananas, which works very effectively, through to more advanced technologies that we need partnerships for and work with in order to make progress on those. So how do we deliver these? We've looked at the problems that we encounter. We've looked at some of the options that we can use to manage these problems. How do we get these to farmers? So partnerships is what we need. And as we all know, partnerships, they have to be mutually beneficial. Both parties need to gain, both parties need to have trust, but partnership is the way forward. We, as an international institute, do not work on our own, ever. We always work in partnership, usually with the national programme, but in terms of providing advanced techniques that we don't have access to, we come to North Carolina State University or Iowa State University, wherever it happens to be, and we work in partnership with those that do have the expertise and the techniques and the skills to do that. Sometimes in very complex, complicated partnerships. So I explain the partnership that we have with North Carolina State, with AgBiome, and all the large internationals. We work quite closely, depending on who it is and what the circumstances are, with the Syngentas and DuPonts of this world. They provide support for us for student training, for exchanges, etc. And we have very good, healthy relationships. I mentioned the banana breeding project that we have. We have about 14 partners scattered around the world. The project is focused on Tanzania and Uganda, where there's a major banana production systems in place. They're the countries that we're focused on, but actually, and as I highlight here, we're working with Boyce Thompson in Cornell, Weill Cornell, University of Charlotte in North Carolina, as well as in Australia, in Europe, in Czechoslovakia, all over the world basically, in order to provide us with techniques and the skills and the knowledge in order to implement a banana breeding project in Africa. So that's back to the researchers per million. If we're going to make a difference here, as I said, it's not going to happen overnight. It won't happen tomorrow. It's a generational thing. But what we need to do, and what IITA and all the international centres are heavily involved in, is training and capacity building. Everything that we do effectively is underscored by training and capacity building. Whether that be at the farmer level, discussing with farmers on a basic understanding of nematodes and nematode problems, whether it be with national programmes, providing basic skills in nematology training and how to assess for nematodes, nematode damage in the field. We're also involved with the University of Ghent, providing short courses that contribute to the international masters in nematology. We have exchange students that come from outside of Africa, gain experience, but not only do they gain experience in our labs and in our activities, they provide a wealth of new experiences for the people that are in the lab. It's a very healthy arrangement to have people coming and going and taking people out of their normal comfort zone. I'm not sure what Hattie would think of it here. Hattie's from Togo, and he went to Switzerland. He said he'd never been so cold in all his life and he never wanted to go back. But he did enjoy the experience, as you can see. And of course, you know, North Carolina State University, Iowa State. We don't have anything formal with Iowa State at the moment. Hope that it will do in the future. But we have an informal arrangement and understanding and relationship, and I'm here now. So although it's not formal, I'm here. Who knows what kind of arrangements or activities we'll get involved with in partnership in the future. So, and the reward at the end of the day, of course, is happy, smiling, successfully graduated students. Okay. What have we been talking about? What have I been talking about? Africa is a land of open plains, but actually it's not all that positive. You might have nice, wonderful images of Africa and all the animals on the plains, but there is an underlying problem. We have climate change to deal with, so whatever we do and however we go forward, we need to be cognizant of the fact that the climate really is changing, and that has an influence and an impact on how we move forward and what we do and what we look at. We're dealing with farming communities and farming systems that are extremely diverse and complicated and complex, and that we can't just fit one single option in there that will make a difference. We need to be aware of the diversity and work with that, which is sometimes very slow and doesn't happen very quickly, and where mistakes or successes are not made on a regular basis. We're also in an increasingly mobile world where pests and diseases are increasingly moved around the planet, so we need to be aware of that. Our nematode diversity is very broad, very diverse. Dealing with multiple species at one time can be quite challenging, but if we had to focus on any one thing at all within the nematological world, root knot nematode is the beast in the room. They do have a major impact on our economy, and we need to be very much aware of them. I hope I've not blinded anybody, actually. I realise I keep pressing the laser button. So if anybody's stumbling outside, it wasn't me. So Africa, what role do we have as nematologists when we're living in a drier and a hotter world? Water use efficiency will become increasingly more critical for a start. In a more intensified world, we're going to have more intensified pests and diseases, as well as our cropping production systems. We're going to have greater mobility of those pests and diseases as they move around, and we don't have quite the same tools that we used to have, so we need to be aware of new tools to come in. We need to be open to partnership, embrace new tools, new mechanisms of delivery, and we need to remember that it's not always what you can see that's always the problem. Sometimes it's what you can't see. And of course this was in reference to Sassa's hidden enemy, but it's very true. It's not always what we can see that we need to be concerned about. It's what we can't see. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I hope you've all stayed awake. And yeah, I'll just finish off with Joe Sassa, which I finished off with first class. He made a huge impact, and he did have a global impact, and as I started off with a lecture in North Carolina, I said, he may have written his International Amyloid Gynae project results in 1985. To this day, I still rely on the law. I still go back and I still reference his work from that time. Yes, it's outdated, but it's still a good, substantial foundation for how we move forward. So don't ignore everything before the advent of the internet. Not everything that isn't on the internet is not to be looked at. There are stuff out there that isn't on the internet. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel all the time. We just need to look a little deeper sometimes instead of just relying what's in front of our faces on the computer. It's what's not there that might be important. What you can't see. Thank you very much. That's me.
Well, do we have questions? Don't be shy. There
Are you turning or do you want me to choose?
we go. Pardon me?
Okay,
you
Alison.
You go, it's your show.
So, Danny, the biocontrols that you're testing, are those organisms found in Africa, or are those organisms that are being found elsewhere and then you're just taking them there to test them?
A little bit of both. But the regulatory and registration situation in Africa is really quite complicated, complex, and drawn out, as you're probably aware. So bringing anything in, especially biological, is really quite a challenge to get that registered. Costs money for a start, it's time, they don't want to bring something in that we don't know about, etc.
Yeah.
So sometimes from outside Africa or outside the country, where it's been commercialised, I like to look at products that have actually already been commercialised, so you don't have to go through that process. But I highlighted AgBiome. AgBiome have got funding from the Gates to look at novel compounds or novel or microorganisms that will be reactive against nematodes. So we're looking in East Africa and West Africa. They will come back here, they will look at them, assess them, and then anything useful will go back and hopefully be made a product out of. But we're keen to look at Pasteria actually. So link in with Syngenta for the Pasteria, which is an obligate bacterium that attacks nematodes. That's being commercialised for use on soybean cyst nematode, I believe. Is that working? Do you know? Does anybody know? Okay. Yeah, I've heard conflicting comments, so I'm not sure. But for the paper, for example, the banana paper, that would be a great way of delivering a payload of Pasteria to the root zone. Okay. Any more?
I'm interested in this transfer of genus system to Africa from South America. I imagine that came in on somebody's food or something. Does anybody know anything about that, how it started? It was not in Africa, and also it wasn't in Africa, so it's probably by some plane travel, I would imagine. So I guess the follow-up question is, are they doing any kind of, Australia does this extensively, screening for, people coming in and how they, transfer pathogens from other continents, or vice versa?
Our phytosanitary system in Africa is pretty porous, shall we say. We don't have the MPVOs in place. By and large, the plant protection officers, the systems are underfunded, the lack of knowledge or skills to identify and prevent things coming in. PCN went to Europe, as we're all aware. Europe is now a secondary source of infection to the rest of the world, and we suspect that it almost surely came from Europe in seed material, actually.
So went to Europe and then it came into
Yeah. So we suspect it came in on seed that was not properly checked, and we detected it 3 years ago, I think 2015, and from there on we thought, well, let's do a survey, find out exactly where it is, and we can start dealing with it. We surveyed 1,400 fields, and 82% of those were positive, including, I think, about 80% of seed production fields. And that's Rostockiensis. Pallida was also found in one field. So Paladin, but they're both there, unfortunately. Yeah. But more things will come in, if they're not already there. We think Melodigaina chipwoodi is also there, and we're just confirming that. But officially, it's not there. But we're just confirming that. But things will continue to come in and go out as we become more mobile.
Coming in on the sea material than that and travelers.
Well, it could be both. Yeah. But it's much more likely to take a hold and faster if it's on sea material, of course. But yeah, you know, you got even within Africa, you've got people wandering around Africa with their yam in their back pocket to take to their grandmother on the other side of Africa. There's a large amount of movement of plant material within Africa, unofficial.
And you showed one field trial of transgenic bananas, I think, from leads and 48 inhibitors, I guess. And so is that working well? And I guess the real question is, what's the incentive for industry to get into this field? Is there a market for it? Can they recover their investment if they put money in the development of technology? Or are there other avenues to accomplish getting technology out there?
The biosafety regulations across Africa are dragging, painfully so. That was in Uganda actually that you saw there, and they've been really quite progressive, as have Nigeria in particular, and Tanzania as well. We still don't have biosafety regulations, and it will still be an uphill struggle to get public opinion to accept them, no doubt. It is a good way forward. Bananas, if anything, is the perfect vehicle to take that forward, because bananas are sterile, so there's no chance of cross-contamination. They're completely sterile, multiplied purely through vegetatively propagated material. So that would be the best vehicle to at least get it established. There's good support from research. Most of that work actually was funded by USAID, who have been huge supporters of that. The actual field trial I couldn't find a picture of the nematode one, but it doesn't really make much difference. That was for bacterial wilt, the picture I showed. They're in place. We're just waiting really for the regulations to come through for us to be able to then take them out to the field.
But that's the 48 inhibitor work, and it's working against them?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Working pretty well actually. Against nematodes, it was standing up really well. Not 100%, but a massive suppression. So what we haven't done is we haven't monitored that over several cycles, which is what we're in the process of doing. But certainly early on, really good suppression across species.
You mentioned the use of antagonist such as Trachoderma and other bacterial pathogens to control Melodidani and other nematodes. What's the possibility that this organisms might stand as like synergies that will increase the prevalence of this nematode?
Did you say that last bit again, sorry?
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I said you mentioned the use of Trachoderma and other bacterial pathogens as antagonists to control these nematodes, such as Melodidani and the rest. So what's the possibility that they might act as synergists and like increase the prevalence of nematodes in Africa?
Pretty limited really. You know, the ones that we work with, we know work against nematodes, reduce them and prevent them, suppress them, antagonize them, and even parasitize them. So they're screened in the lab to begin with, so very little possibility or potential, I would say. And the ones that we have worked with have worked really well. It's not a silver bullet, and everything basically needs to be taken into consideration as a package, and what are the best options to combine for the most effective way forward, for the circumstances that are prevailing in one place or another. The certain options won't work one place, but they will work in another place for one reason or another. But the antagonists we're keen on being able to utilise and use as infection of or inoculation onto planting material. So they're delivered to the farmer loaded with a protective agent. Yeah.
we're doing.
So, kind of a follow-up on that. The transgenic microalgae and rhizobacteria, that makes such good sense, but and you said the biological rates are lagging Africa. How difficult will it be to introduce those?
Very. I suspect. It's a great concept, and we may be able to use them elsewhere than Africa. And it's in very early stages, but I particularly like that, which is why I put it in, because I think it's out there, it's very different. They've shown good proof of concept in the lab. But anything with transgenic, we know straight away it will take time, and getting regulations for their use
I'm just curious.
will be difficult.
Is this a company called Indigo that's specializing in microbial inoculants? Are they involved in this project in any way?
I'm not familiar with Indigo. We work with a number of different private and commercial companies, AgBiome being one of those, for example. It just depends who we know. A lot of it comes down to personal contacts as well as who's on the market.
So I was interested in the extension of the technology, right? So you were talking about the bananas and peeling the roots and then the hot water treatment, but it takes 18 months for the farmer to see the difference, right, in that treatment. So do you do kind of demonstrations with farmers and then hope that they will teach their neighbors, and so in that way it kind of expands the knowledge? Or do you have to work with individual farmers and they have to see it for themselves? They're not going to believe their neighbor. Am I making sense?
Yeah, very much sense. Yeah. No, we work with demonstrations with farmers who are either ahead of the game or respected by their peers, basically. You work with farmers who got respect from other people, who will take it forward, will take it on board, and then we work with the extension agent or an NGO or somebody for field days for the farmer to then talk about the gains, the benefits or not of what we've been doing. You let the farmers speak for themselves, basically. You don't paraphrase them, or we try not to anyway. But often you need to introduce a new technology in order for them to take it on board, and then you let the farmer do all the talking. And it either will work or it won't work. It either works or it doesn't work, and if it works, it will either take off or it won't, depending on how you approach that. But using farmers as a communication vehicle is the best way.
And so what is the obstacle that makes it not work? When they don't see a big difference, or?
Not understanding to begin with, for a start, cost. Chemical pesticide, for example, costs a bucket, and they won't use it because it costs too much. So therefore you have to work with them in order to show that actually when used properly, it will kill what you want to kill. And at the end of the day, you get massive more yield, which actually is much more than what you pay for the chemical. So you have to demonstrate, and you have to go through the process, and on long, perennial crops, it just takes so much longer. Cultural differences, for one reason or another, a certain tactic doesn't work because it's no-go in that culture.
One last question. Have you looked at green manures?
Yes. Yeah.
And is there anything there, or?
Yeah, I didn't go in with the what's name, but Macuna in particular. But a number of cover crops as green manures, Titonia, neem. There's only a few, but Macuna is one of the best actually. But yes, we have. Yeah. And again, it depends on where you are and what crop you're dealing with, and the situation.
Okay, might as well.
Real quick, do you have the resources to do systematic monitoring, or is it just really in response to an event here, an event there?
Monitoring in terms of disease surveillance, or monitoring your activity?
Monitoring the nematode occurrence, speciation, the occurrence of disease.
Offhand, no. We need to attract funding in order to do that. And in order to do that, I would need to submit a proposal to a funding agent to say this is what we want to do. All our work is effectively grant based upon a grant proposal that's submitted to a donor. So no, we don't have the resources, and in order to get resources, we would need to submit a proposal. And donors don't really like surveys, so you need to embed a survey and monitoring into a larger, more project that delivers something tangible.
One last question. Vijaya, do you have one?
So trichoderma has been used as a potent biocontrol agent over decades, right? So what is the dominant species in the microbiome that you are using for nematode control? Have you identified any new species for biocontrol?
I personally haven't, no. We selected and isolated to begin with, and then I actually moved over to using the Trichoderma asperellum in East Africa, which is produced as a commercial product by a small company in East Africa. And when we tested it, it actually worked better than all the ones that we'd isolated from the soil, and it seems to actually parasitize the root knot nematodes. So rather than continue, especially when you're trying to prove for the concept, we just worked with that Trichoderma asperellum, which tends to work very well. It goes endophytically, it colonizes endophytically really quite easily into most crops, and so we've just stuck with that. So to focus on something else, it would probably have to be substantially better than what you've got already commercialized, because the process of commercialization and registration is a huge amount of money. So I've just stuck with Trichoderma asperellum basically.
Thanks. Great questions. Maybe 3 quick comments that I make. The reason why Danny was able to visit us, because he alluded to that, he was the invited speaker to present a Sasser lecture at NC State. Joe Sasser was a very powerful nematologist who pulled off something quite impressive, the International Meloidodyne Project in the 80s. If you at all into nematodes, you will have heard that, and if you have any nematode, root knot nematode question, you might find a lot of information that came out of that. Just as an aside, Roger's question about potato cyst nematode being introduced into Africa, you don't even have to go that far. In the U.S. Northwest, in Idaho, Washington, we all of a sudden have potato cyst nematodes appear. The Rostochiensis at some places, Pallida and others, and a completely different species, Ellingtona. So it makes you wonder where these things are really coming from. Have they been there? Did we select them? Did we miss them for a long time? And so forth. And the last comment, you mentioned ag biome, so we have a slight Iowa State connection there. We have Jared Jensen. You may remember him as your fellow student in Greg's lab. He's with ag biome and is now somewhat involved in that project. Great. So with that, again, I thank you all for being here. I thank very much Danny for taking the time and on a very tight schedule, zip up here, and he's going to get snowed on for his reward, and let's thank him again. If you're a student that